My guest today is Jay Jenkins. Jay is the tech strategist and evangelist for the Google Cloud business in Asia-Pacific region and helps organizations and practitioners transform their technologies and processes in order to support more agile, scalable, and secure digital operations. Jay has more than 20 years of experience applying transformative technologies to a wide range of industries around the globe. Prior to Google, Jay was a partner at a specialist technology firm focused on agile technology transformation and business process reengineering. Jay has also worked in global consulting firms where he specialized in business process transformation through technology. Jay was born in the United States and has a master's in business administration from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Jay has lived and worked in Australia, Vietnam, and Singapore. Welcome even to this edition of Make or Ma Moments with Monehin. And I'd like to ask my guest, Jay Jenkins. Who is Jay Jenkins?
Right. Well, that's a great and challenging question to start with. So who am I? So it's interesting. I sort of look at we are sort of the result of experiences that we've had, right? So I look at myself. I was a child of an Air Force father. We moved around a lot as a kid. After university, I also chose to move around a lot as an adult. So, I lived in New York for 7 years. I lived in Melbourne for 7 years. I lived in Vietnam for a couple of years as well, which was super exciting. And currently I live in Singapore, and we've been here for about 8 years so far. And if I look at my career, I've kind of treated that in very much the same way. I'm always open for adventures, and whether that's moving to a new location or moving to a different role and experiencing different things, I guess that is me. I tend to be, I tend to look for adventure, and for me, what adventure means is an ability to sort of like challenge myself and explore new things. I'm not a beach holiday person. I am more of an urban vacationer. Last year, me and a couple of friends of mine went to Everest Base Camp as well, which was a challenge. So but that said, I didn't take that next step in the challenge and go for the summit, mostly because I have 2 kids as well that I don't want to leave behind. But for me, that's how I think about myself. I think about myself as sort of an explorer and an adventurer through life, and that's how I treat my personal life, and that's how I treat my work life as well.
Excellent. So, talking about adventure in the technology world, where adventure, creativity, and innovation are prized, a number of millennials are aspiring to play a role in technology. Can you tell me how you became a technology strategist and Google Cloud evangelist?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, it's one of these long journeys. I feel it's sometimes when you look back on your life and you think about how you got here, you feel as if you've been carried by a wind or carried by a river, and that you don't have or didn't have control over it. But I think if anybody really looks back and thinks about how they got where they are, yes, there are certain things that opportunities that come to you through luck. But it really is the choices that you make that take you to where you are, right? So you always have to make sure that even if you are carried by a river, that you put your oars in the water and you direct yourself, in terms of where you're going. I actually dropped out of my undergrad program to go work for a technology startup. So that's how it started. So I was actually, and not in California, where you might expect. I was actually in Missouri, and I went to the University of Missouri for my undergrad. But there was a technology company based there, and I left to join that company because I was just really excited by technology and really wanted to get into it. And they had a great program where they actually because they didn't have the skills required, gave you 12 weeks of training before you even started, putting your hands on a keyboard to help customers. So that's sort of where I started. So I actually come from an engineering background. My undergrad program was also in engineering. And it started there. So from there, I worked for this small startup. We got acquired 2 times over, as things go in the technology world. I then moved to another technology company in New York, worked for them for a little while, and then decided that I needed a little bit of money because I was living in New York. And then went into consulting on my own for a little while. So it was actually not really on my own. It was me and one other person. We sort of had this little company that we would go and build software for enterprises. After that, I then worked for KPMG, doing the same thing, doing mostly engineering and consulting. Then transferred down to Australia. This was as Bearing Point sort of spun off. KPMG Consulting became Bearing Point back at that time. So there were a number of technology companies that spun off from these larger consulting companies. So Accenture spun off from Andersen, Bearing Point spun off from KPMG. And I went and worked for Bearing Point in Australia for a few years. And then, one of the interesting things that happened was I was leaving Bearing Point. And at the time, I was actually interviewing for a role at a bank. And I think this is one of those times where I stuck my oar in the water and decided where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And so I was interviewing for National Australia Bank in Australia. So it was a business technology partner role inside of National Australia Bank. And I think it was on my 3rd or 4th interview. And I got a cold call from a recruiter. And they said, hey, can we just have a chat? He goes, I understand that you're leaving Bearing Point. I don't know how he knew. I still don't know how he knew. But before you make your next decision, I just want to have a chat. And I was like, you know what? Okay, that's fine. I can have a chat. And so I went and met with this person, and they said, you know what? You can go work for National Australia Bank. I think you'll have a great career there. But I don't think that you're done with sort of a broader consulting world. And when he said that, I knew that he was right. And after that conversation and one other conversation with him after that, I decided to join this other company, which was a very small consulting firm of about 50 people. And I was brought on to lead their business process management practice. So we were building a lot of software at that company, and I was brought on to run that practice. I actually called the hiring manager at National Australia Bank, and I said, hey, look, thank you so much for the opportunity, but I've decided to go work for this this small growing consulting company. And the hiring manager, she said to me, I actually think you're making the right choice for yourself, right? So I think it's times like that you're like, oh, okay, good. It wasn't sort of like, certainly there was a disappointment there, but it was more, you know what, you were making the right choice for you, and I agree with that choice. So in some ways, I'm sad I didn't get to work for her, right? Because it sounds like she really understands what it means to be a leader, which is understanding that it's about the growth of people. So I went to go work for this other company, became a partner at that firm. We then sold that company. As part of that deal, I went and ran the offshore development center in Vietnam for that company for a couple of years, and was also doing work in Singapore. And so one of the things I did as part of that acquisition was, I wanted to go get my MBA. So I asked them not to pay for it. I didn't want them to pay for it at all. I just wanted them to give me the time off. So 1 week every 5 weeks. They agreed to that. So again, I think in terms of leadership, great leaders, because that's what you do. You give people that space to grow. And I went and got my MBA. At the end of my earn-out period, as part of the acquisition, I left, and then I joined Google. I actually joined Google Cloud about 7 years ago, which for Google Cloud was very early in the day. So I actually moved from being a manager to back to being an IC. So I was an individual contributor at Google for a couple of years, then moved back to being a manager as that team grew, or I guess as our product set grew enough that we could have a team. And that's where I started to again, sort of like looking for that adventure. I mean, luckily Google is a big company, and there are lots of nooks and crannies for adventure inside of the company. And I realized that there was a little bit of a gap in terms of how we were approaching our business. So maybe to give you some insight into what my role is at Google, or was, I should say, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of some of the changes, is I was a customer engineering manager. So customer engineers are like sales engineers or pre-sales engineers. So I managed a team that went and helped our customers figure out how to validate their solutions and how to move their solutions to Google Cloud. What we were missing, though, is we were missing a little bit of awareness in the market, and we were missing a little bit of thought leadership from the engineering side. So what I did is I worked with the marketing team and reinforced that thought leadership on the engineering side. So I was helping the marketing team plan content, plan online series, plan webinars, planning content for our summits, and just recently helping to plan content for our global next conference, which this year is digital for obvious reasons. So I'd seen this gap. Now I guess there are pros and cons to doing something like that, right? I was not compensated on that. It was not part of my role and responsibility, but I knew that this was something that had to be done for the business. The leaders, that I was working with, so the people that I was reporting to, luckily, they made sure that I wasn't penalized for that. But of course, that means you have to do your other job as well, right? So you have to do your primary job where you've got your roles and responsibilities, but then you also have to sort of make this other time because you feel that it's important and you feel that it's something that has to be done. And I think that this is, in terms of when people grow and when they're thinking about new things, right? There are roles that are given to you, right? This list of roles and responsibilities. And there is your own innate sense of the jobs that need to be done in this business in order to help achieve its goals, achieve the business goals. And that's where you sort of have to step out of that defined list of roles and responsibilities and decide, you know what, I'm going to take a leadership role here. This is an unexplored area. We don't know whether it's going to be successful or not, but I'm just going to take this risk because I think it's important. And I believe that it's going to have an impact on the business. So that's what I did. So I sort of had these two jobs for a while. Then we had a leadership change. We've had a couple of leadership changes at Google Cloud. And there was an opportunity then to formalize this role. So I was the customer engineering manager for Southeast Asia. So in particular, working with our specialist engineers around some of our cutting edge products, like our data analytics products, AI products, and some of our newer hybrid products as well. And what I did was I essentially wrote the role. So, I sat down, working with sort of like my skip level, because he really wanted to make this role happen as well and saw the value in it. And so I put together this job description. I said, okay, this is the role, how I see it. This is what I should be doing. Is we're going to need this role at first for APAC, but there's potential here to grow this into another role. And so Google being Google and having a process, I actually wrote this job description, and then I had to go and interview for the role. It wasn't a full interview, but inside of Google, you have to do, I had to do 2 interviews internally, just in terms of the process. And then, of course, in Singapore, you also have to post roles externally as well. So, we had to follow that process, which is what we did. Luckily, I got the role. I would have been extremely disappointed if I hadn't gotten the role. And now, so now I'm in this new role, right? So doing tech strategy and evangelism, which is that voice of engineering externally. And then I'm also helping to form some of our strategies internally as well in terms of continuing to create these special interest groups that we have inside of Google for around specific technologies as well. Right, so sort of like bridging that gap between our internal engineering community and the external engineering community, and with some of our customers, looking at things beyond just technology. So whenever I say something like technology strategy, I also think about technology operations, technology culture, and all of those things that customers that want to work with Google want to know about. Right, so I try to make sure that we cover all those bases in terms of how we're presenting ourselves and our products externally.
Well, thanks very much, Jay. And it's interesting, that you're a partner in a firm and you got an MBA, but you took a decision to join Google and go through the ranks again. And that brings me to my next question about decisions.
Yes.
Whether or not we're conscious of it, success or failure in life is a summation of choices we make and decisions we take. When we make a choice, we forgo the consequences of alternatives. And that's what the economists call the opportunity cost. Because man is finite, we choose to either invest in this or invest in that, either to push forward or pull back, to say yes or say no. There's a saying that successful people make the right decisions early and manage those decisions daily. Of course, all you need are a few bad decisions to wreck your life. Could you tell me of a time when you had to make a difficult decision which you knew had the potential to either make or mar you, i.e. the outcome of that decision could either make or mar you?
Sure, absolutely. It's funny, right? You sort of, as I said before, you sort of look back in your life at the decisions you've made, and there are times that you sort of put the oar in the water and make a choice. I should probably preface this a little bit. In terms of my career, I am definitely a risk taker. I will always find the unexplored path and go down that road rather than going with, a known, which provides good opportunities. But where I feel, there could be greater opportunities, not just financially, right? For me, it's also great opportunities for learning as well. But yes, with that comes other types of risks, and certainly, as with anybody, you can look back and see certainly a lot of bad decisions that you've made in the past, which have marred you in a certain context. I think probably one of the biggest decisions I made, because it also affected my family, right? And I think you have to take those things into consideration. So we were a young family when we got acquired, and we made the choice when my daughter was 6 months old, and my wife was still on maternity leave at the time, to go to Vietnam and run the Offshore Development Center. I made that choice, though, not just for the learning experience and living in Vietnam, which was fantastic, and working with a brilliant team of engineers in Vietnam as well. Part of that reason was also to go and get my MBA. So I was doing my MBA out of Singapore. So Australia to Singapore is quite a flight. Vietnam to Singapore, not as bad. I also knew that I did not want to work for a large consulting company. So the consulting company we had grown to about a company of about 100 people by the time I left. And the company that acquired us had a couple thousand people. So, I realized at the time I didn't want to work for like a large consulting company at the time either. So my decision was essentially an exit strategy from this company. And so what I was thinking is I could run this offshore development center, learn a lot while I'm there, have a fantastic experience, get my MBA at the same time, so that investment in myself, right? So the money that I was getting out of the acquisition of that small consulting company, I was putting into myself. And I think that's another thing that's always good to bet on yourself, because that's probably the greatest, asset you have. So, I took that decision to invest it in myself. Now for my family, that was a very tough decision. I knew it would not be easy for my wife to get a job whenever she was going back to work, being an expat in Vietnam. She did end up getting part-time work, actually, also at the Offshore Development Center. And then also for my daughter, right? So, there were the opportunities weren't as great for a good education. There are some good schools there as well, but those are some considerations I was thinking about as well. So one of the things that I had to make sure of is, and I was taking a sort of a big bet on it, is that we would have an exit strategy from Vietnam. So Vietnam is a great country. We spent 2 years there. But I really wanted to make sure that I had opportunities for my wife and also for my children's schooling. So Singapore, I was going there 1 week every 5 weeks to do my MBA. After my MBA completed, we came up with an exit strategy to get to Singapore. I did that actually as part of the consulting company that I was with. And we were on, actually, it was a project we were doing here in Singapore. It was not a great project, to be honest with you. It was a project that was kind of falling apart, but for me and my family, it was the right choice because it allowed us to then get to Singapore, and then I could also start exploring other opportunities. So essentially what happened is, just at the end of my earnout, the company I was working with immediately terminated my contract. I had 30 days to get out of Singapore. And so, what I did was I sent my family back to Australia. I got myself an extension, and then I got myself a PEP, which is a personalized employment pass in Singapore. It allows me to sponsor myself for 6 months. So that's what I did. So I was unemployed in Singapore, looking for a new role. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work for a cloud company. I thought that there were a lot of opportunities in cloud, and I thought that was a high growth area. I did interview at AWS as well. So I was interviewing at AWS, so Amazon, and I was interviewing at Google at the same time. I got the role at Google, luckily, within that 6 month time period. So it was a very high risk and very stressful time. And then at that time, I was able to bring my family back as well. But it was certainly a very low point, right? And honestly, I probably would have had to go back into consulting, or a bigger consulting company back in Australia. Ended up sort of where I wanted to be, in a cloud company. I ended up with my MBA. I ended up getting my family back to Singapore, and yeah, I think for me that was certainly the biggest risk that we took, right? And then while we've been in Singapore, we've had another child, right? So sort of many blessings out of that, but certainly at the time, a lot of uncertainty. But from that decision, my cultural fit at Google. Google works with me. I feel like I definitely have an opportunity to be autonomous, create my own role. But that also takes a lot of work, right? And sometimes you're not so sure about those things either. But at least I'm at a company that allows me to take those risks quite comfortably.
Good story. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think when we met in Chicago, you were living in Vietnam then, right?
That's right. Yeah. So University of Chicago, I was living in Vietnam. Luckily, University of Chicago had a program, a cohort that was based out of Singapore. So it was 1 week every 5 weeks in Singapore, and then a few sessions out of London and a few sessions out of Chicago.
Okay, now interesting that you talked about AWS. About 5 years ago, Google Cloud Platform was a newbie in Asia. When you talk in terms of the cloud solution space, you had the AWS who had like 70% market share. You had Microsoft Azure. You had IBM Bluemix. You had even had Alibaba. But right now, Google Cloud is currently about the fastest growing cloud provider in Asia, expanding to Thailand, to Philippines, to Vietnam. Of course, you have the key advantage because of your ecosystem in apps, application program interfaces, analytics, and machine learning platforms. But I would like to ask you, because you grew so fast. Google, i.e., Google Cloud, grew so fast in Asia Pacific area. What advice do you have for business owners that are trying to grow their market share?
You're absolutely right. Amazon was the first mover in that space in terms of really getting people to adopt cloud. You had Microsoft, who were playing catch up in cloud, much like we were. However, they are an enterprise company, right? Whereas Google is considered sort of a very consumer-centric company. So it's a really interesting space to be in. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I joined Google, is because it was new, because there were so many opportunities. Being a technologist and someone who loved technology, Google internally has some fantastic technology, right? We had to create a lot of our own products internally in order to service these billions of users, right? 8 products with over 1 billion users. One of the things I like to talk about with customers is whenever you go to Google search, right, it never says it's down for maintenance. It never says come back later. People expect it to be up. And in order to do that, in order to crawl through trillions of websites, we had to invent a lot of technologies. And up until then, those things had not been available to, outside of Google. So so I guess the thing that people have to do in terms of that advice, what is it that a company needs to do? And I think Amazon would have the same advice, right? So Jeff Bezos has his customer obsession. Google has a focus on the user. It is listening to what your customers want. Whenever Google was first starting out in the cloud space, most of our customers were cloud natives, and they needed sort of cloud native style applications. As more and more enterprises came on, they wanted enterprise type applications, and Google had to make a very hard pivot to say, okay, let's step back and think about, instead of thinking about how to help others work like Google, how can we create tools to help them work like they want to work? So we really had to do a hard pivot, and as we approached that enterprise market, and they were looking for new tools, so we had to sort of step back and, okay, great, let's talk about infrastructure. Not everybody's ready for serverless at the moment. I mean, now everybody's rushing back to serverless, but at the time it was a very different conversation. So really, it is about listening to their customers, and in particular when they disagree with you, right? So if they are using your products in ways that you did not intend, then you need to start making it intentional, right? You need to really think about how they're using your products and pivot towards that. If a customer tells you, your customer support isn't good enough, you need to listen to that. You need to go and invest in those things that the customers need. Now, the interesting thing about the cloud space, and in particular with Google, is one of the things they were also telling us was, for instance, it's always easy to get a meeting around artificial intelligence. It just is, right? Hey, Google would like to come to talk to you about AI. It's very easy to get a meeting. So what we had to do was think about that as well. Okay, what does it mean to have productive AI? Because one of the first questions they would ask us is, what should we do with AI? We're Google. We can't really tell you what to do with AI. We need to think about, well, what question do you want to ask? And all of a sudden, we're actually co-creating and innovating with the customer. Okay, so now they need more than tools from us. They need to understand how to operate. They need to understand how AI works in a deployed world, which has been a lot of the focus over the past couple of years. They need to understand better how to scale their apps. So, if a customer is still working with virtual machines, they're not going to be as agile as they expect to be when they move to clouds. As Google, what can we do to help them do that? right? So again, it comes back to listening to your customers. And whenever they're asking you for something again and again, can Google help us? Can Google help us? Then we need to be in a position where we can say yes, that we can help you.
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you so much. So moving on to leadership now. The top 3 countries viewed to possess technological expertise are in your area. They're all in the East. Japan, number 1, China, and South Korea. What skills or characteristics make an effective leader in a remote working environment?
Right. So first of all, hiring. You need to hire the right kind of people. And that means not just hiring, it means not hiring people who are just going to do what you say, right? What you need to do is look for smart, creative people who want to grow. If you find smart, creative people who want to grow, then they are going to help your company grow. So what we need to do is we need to start looking for more creative people, people who can think of new ideas, people who can innovate, people who want to take risks, people who want to learn new things and embrace new technologies. I feel that a lot of organizations have what we call operational lock-in, right? Your business can only move as fast as your operations can change. So you need to make sure that you're building a strong culture of change, and hiring is the first place that starts. The next thing you need to do as a leader is become a good coach, right? So try not to be a traditional manager where you're doing like a lot of micromanagement, where you're trying to make a list of the tasks that your team needs to do. Again, if you have smart, creative people, you can set goals and they can come up with the tasks. And that just means less work for you, right? That gives you a better ability to scale. It allows you to push down the decision-making to those teams and to trust those teams as well. So, that's certainly the second thing you need to do is really on being a coach. And maybe I should explain some more of the nuance of the difference is a coach isn't somebody with coach. If you know the answer, is your first thought process should be, why don't they know the answer? What is it that they're missing? What information do I have that they don't have? And why aren't they thinking about that? And then turning it around and asking them the right questions to help them get to that answer. Or sometimes what amazes me is when they get to a better answer, because that can happen as well, right? Where you can just be asking questions and they actually come to a better answer than you could ever have thought of yourself, right? And that's when you know you're actually helping this person grow. And that also allows you to trust that person more, that, okay, they understand how this works now. I can trust them to make the right decision, right? So you really need to move into that coaching culture as well, and giving them those opportunities to be autonomous and opportunities to grow.
Okay, good. So you as a Google Cloud evangelist with focus in Asia-Pacific, you're responsible for spreading the doctrine of cloud computing and convincing reluctant businesses to make the jump. A cloud platform frees you from overhead of managing infrastructure, managing servers, configuring networks. What are the drawbacks of working in an agile environment, and how can businesses mitigate that impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there certainly are things that you need to think about when you're working in an agile environment, and a lot of that comes from an understanding that there are certain things required in order to get there. One is again, in terms of cloud and technology, is a love and trust of automation. What you need to do is make sure that you're removing that day-to-day toil, those opportunities for error from those agile teams, because if you don't do that, right, if you're just deploying every week, there are and you don't change that, there are lots of opportunities for error. So you idea of automation. The other thing you need to think about as a team is drop the idea of an operations and administration team. Embrace the idea that the technology will constantly change, that a project is in fact never finished, that the technology has a life. What we found with a lot of customers is they'll have traditional operations, right, where these teams monitor the software, something goes wrong, they reboot a machine. Google has something that they call site reliability engineering, and in fact, it's actually used throughout the industry now, where our operations team are also developers. And if an error happens, their job is not to just reboot the machine. Their job is to find out the root cause, repair it and fix it, and make sure that that never happens again. They also monitor our speed of deployment. So there's a thing called an error budget, right? So you have like service level objectives and service level agreements. And when that margin starts getting close to your service level objective, they have the power to say, okay, no new features. Until you get your SLOs and SLAs back up, you can't deploy any new features. You just have to work on stability, right? So having that well-defined and empowering that operations to put the brakes on new features, making sure that that team are also a team of developers who are actually helping to fix and repair rather than just turning the machine back on and off again, right? So it's not just around technology. It's not just around your development. It is also around your operations. So you need to think about that end-to-end process around development and operations, not just development in terms of agile.
Thank you. Good. It's hard to imagine that there was a time when common users worldwide could not communicate with one another instantly by computer. And yet it was only 30 years ago that Berners-Lee, the British scientist, created the World Wide Web. These days, businesses are seeking digital strategies that drive long-term results, optimizing their websites to get organic or unpaid traffic from search engine results, and putting them on the top of the list. So apart from the general advice of using keywords, creating content regularly, site maps, URL structure, and the likes, what advice do you have for businesses trying to optimize, their presence on the internet, trying to take advantage of SEO and making their website SEO friendly?
Right. Well, there's a few things that you should definitely do. Number one is you need to start measuring right away. Right. So it goes back to what I was saying before. You really need to listen to your customers and how your customers are using your sites, where they're coming from. You need to be able to go out and measure that. You need to measure where they're coming from, how they're doing things, and reinforce those things. You need to understand what your strategy is for your website. So is your strategy to drive a purchase? So of those people, in terms of where they're coming from, what is actually driving them to that purchase? Is it to get them to sign up for, a newsletter? What is driving them to that newsletter? What is the value of that customer once they are registering for the first time, or they're purchasing something for the first time, or they're filling up that shopping cart? So you need to think about where those customers are coming from and then reinforce that in terms of your search engine optimization or your advertising or your different channels, your Instagram influencers, wherever it is those customers are coming from. Reinforce that to make sure that you're putting your money, your dollars behind those things that are actually going to help you drive the value out of that website. Right. So the first thing you should absolutely do is start to measure where your customers are coming from, what they're doing, and how they, convert whatever it is, whatever the goal is of you getting them to your website, whatever that goal is. Where are they coming from? How can I actually go out and approach those people to make sure that more of those types of people come, or that I can understand their journey a little bit better. So again, it comes back to really focusing on the customer and making sure that they have a great experience to, number one, get to your site, And then secondly, making sure they're having a great experience when they're on your site and find out what they need faster.
Thanks, Jay. So that brings us to the end of this interview, conversation, I would say. So is there anything on your heart, anything in your mind that you'd like to just, wrap up with?
No, look, I mean, I think obviously, the pandemic is on a lot of people's minds. And earlier you were asking me the question around, that you have this great tool that connects people. I'm also still always amazed by the amount of innovation that can happen when something like this occurs. So it's interesting, talking to a lot of organizations as they move to work from home, and they're like, oh, we could never work from home. Like it's not possible, until the government says everybody has to work from home, and then they make it happen. I think it's a great example of one of those times where innovation loves constraints. But I think maybe the thing that I would say is this obviously accelerated a lot of things. Change was accelerated by the pandemic. But there is no new normal. That change is constant, and we're going to have to realize that, and we're going to have to make sure that as we're planning our lives as individuals, as leaders, we need to position ourselves for change, and we need to embrace change as it comes.